Good morning. My name is Hindell Grossman. I'm a divorce attorney. My law firm is called Grossman and Associates, LTD, and it's located in Newton, Massachusetts. Today I'm sitting with Todd Weaver, whose business name is Strategies for College, to talk about strategies for college, in particular, those strategies that may be applicable to those families who've been divorced and how to maximize financial aid.
College has become so expensive, and the return on investment is not as clear as it perhaps once was. It's important for the student to be looking at great schools where they're going to have opportunities to be exceptional and do it at the right price.
Good morning, Todd.
Good morning, Hindell.
Our podcasts are called Inside Divorce, and we talk about topics that are applicable to divorced families. So I'm going to ask first you to tell us about yourself a little bit, and then we'll talk about how to maximize financial aid.
Sure. Thank you for having me here today. My firm, Strategies for College, has been around for more than a quarter of a century, helping families integrate cost management with admissions and helping the student find a happy place where they can fit in and get out in 4 years and move on with life. And the idea around a lot of our planning is to make sure that families come out of this financially sound as well and give them the tools to make those decisions properly. My background, though, is interesting. I worked at Northeastern University in Boston. While I was getting my master's degree, I was working 20 hours a week in the financial aid office as a graduate assistant. So I learned a heck of a lot about the financial aid process. And that's what I bring to the families I work with today, is the inside knowledge.
What percentage of the families that you work with have been divorced, do you think?
I'd say as a company, we probably have at least a third of our annual clientele coming from situations of separation, divorce, remarriage. So it's a very sizable group.
Where are the offices for Strategies for College?
Strategies for College has families we work with in more than 20 states right now, virtually and in person. But our main offices are in Hanover, New Hampshire, the Boston, Massachusetts area, Shelburne, Vermont, and Austin, Texas.
I see. So you're based in Massachusetts, aren't you?
I am based in Massachusetts.
Well, so tell us how do families maximize financial aid for their children?
I'd say the first line of
thought
is to start early, figuring out what's affordable and what's not. And for families to do that properly, they really should start thinking about the college funding process when their student is a sophomore in high school. The federal government recently changed the way the financial aid forms are looked at, in that families can now apply for financial aid in October of a student's senior year in high school using their tax information from 2 years prior to the student entering college. And that's a lot of verbiage there. What it comes down to is prior year. So the colleges are asking families to give their income information from 2 years prior to the student entering college.
All right, so for example, if the child was a senior in this past fall, 2016, the application could have been filed for financial aid. Is it the FAFSA form?
Yes, the FAFSA form and the CSS profile, the other financial aid.
All right, there are two applications for financial aid then. So both forms could have been filed as early as October of the child's senior year of high school.
Correct.
And using, in our example, what year's tax information would be applicable?
So for those students going to college in the fall of 2017, the family was able to use their 2015 tax return.
Okay. And when did this rule change?
It just was announced a little over a year ago, but went into place in October of 2016.
So quite recently. All right. So this past October was the first time families were able to use the prior. You say prior twice. Prior in tax information for purposes of financial aid.
Correct.
And was the motivation behind this new rule that the 2 years ago, at least the tax return has been filed and therefore more reliable information?
That's a big part of it. I think in the past, people had to scramble to get their taxes done typically by February. After the tax year ended, only several weeks prior to that, so they may have just received their W-2s. Colleges were asking for the financial aid forms with a deadline of February 1st or February 15th. And it was a major struggle for people to get their paperwork done on time. And the big push behind this change was to allow families to use taxes that were already done. Even if they were on extension, they would be done by October, with the idea that that would make things more smooth in terms of creating an actual financial aid offer.
I see. And more reliable tax information.
Correct.
Or income information.
Yes.
All right. So I remember then when I filled out the FAFSA long ago for my kids to go to college, I remember it was due in February. Is that right?
Yes.
Approximately. FAFSA was due in February. And you're right, didn't have a lot of information, took a few guesses
Yes.
about what information I needed to put on the form.
So accuracy is hopefully going to improve.
I see. And is the turnaround time any better?
Well, that's a great question. Turnaround time for many colleges is going to be the same as it was. In other words, many students won't hear from a financial aid office until probably the last week of March or April 1st of the student's senior year in high school, giving them about 4 or 5 weeks to make a decision because May 1st is the deposit day. But there are many schools who've said that they will try to turn around a financial aid award by January, February timeframe.
All right.
Which gives families a little more time to consider the opportunities.
That's excellent. So you mentioned there are 2 different forms and therefore 2 different processes for financial aid. So one is the FAFSA. It's FAFSA. What does that stand for?
That's the free application for federal student aid.
And who does that form go to?
That form goes to every college in the country that takes federal money, which is virtually everyone.
Okay.
There are a few schools that don't, but in large part, the FAFSA form is what determines eligibility for federal loans, grants, scholarships, and state loans, grants, and scholarships. And many institutions will use it to determine what type of institutional aid they want to give to a student as well.
Institutional aid meaning money from the school itself, not from the federal government.
That's correct.
Okay. Well, this is interesting behind-the-scenes information about the finances of the college. So that's the FAFSA. It goes to the college. The college makes a determination based on, I guess, the amount of federal aid it gets. Is that fair?
Yes. Well, technically, the FAFSA form is filed through the Department of Education, and then the data is sent to the colleges that are listed on the form.
Oh, I see.
And then the colleges will process, based on their own internal methods, what the financial aid
But the
award should
financial
be.
aid, the financial aid award from the college through the FAFSA process, though, comes from the college, not Department of Education.
That's correct. Yeah, the college is the financial aid office or the financial aid office of the college is what creates the award based on the federal guidelines, state guidelines, and institutional guidelines of each school.
All right. Is there some base amount or some kind of required amount that's given to each student through the FAFSA process?
Well, depending on what the family's expected family contribution is, that's called the EFC, the college will then offer financial aid based on that number. So, for example, if a family has an EFC calculated to be $20,000 a year, and the college has a sticker price of $60,000 a year, the difference between cost of attendance and the EFC is $40,000. And theoretically, the college would create a financial aid package that meets as much of that $40,000 as they can.
All right.
There are only a handful of colleges out there that meet 100% of that number, so people should always be mindful that they might pay the EFC plus a
More.
difference.
Plus more.
Yes.
All right. So with respect to the FAFSA form, is there information required on that form that's particular to divorced families or that divorced families need to be particularly aware of?
Yes, that's a great question. The FAFSA form is a document that only requires the custodial parent in a divorce to report financial information. That can be pretty advantageous to some families, or not, depending on the situation. But the custodial parent is required to present their income from their prior year taxes and their assets as of the day they fill out the form.
So how do parents determine who the custodial parent is for purposes of the FAFSA application?
That's a very interesting question because it might be very different from a judgment. A document that's put in place saying 50-50 or whatever the split is or financial responsibilities are may be great for the divorce and the situation afterwards, but the colleges really don't take a look at that information. They want to gather the data they need from the custodial parent, if it's the FAFSA form, and simply have the family pay the difference.
So is it possible then, in a scenario where the children live primarily with mom and dad is paying child support, for dad to claim that he's the custodial parent if he has the lower income and there's a greater advantage to get financial aid?
Well, you want to be careful about the legality of it. The way the question is asked on the FAFSA form is structured in such a way that there are two options. The first question is, where do you, the student, live? With whom do you reside more in the calendar year? And theoretically, you want it to be the parent with a lower income. Then if that is a 50-50 split and you can't determine who's who, then the second question, the tiebreaker question on the FAFSA is, well, which parent provides more financial support during the year? And frankly, you don't want to answer that question, right? Because then you're putting down the higher income parent.
Right. Do you have to answer both questions?
One or the other.
One
so you
or
want
the
to
other.
answer the first one.
I see.
If you can't answer the first one,
I
if you
see.
can't separate who's who, then the default is the second question.
Well, the fact is that sometimes it is difficult to tell who the primary or custodial parent is because there are vacations where the children spend with the other parent, and summer times with the other parent, and sometimes people just count up days or hours or overnights in some fashion to determine who the custodial parent is for purposes of the divorce. It's different potentially for purposes of the FAFSA application.
It is, and I think for many families, the simplest way to say it is where the student receives their high school transcript, what their address is at the high school, which house is the residence of the student. That's typically going to be used as the custodial address.
Have you seen any circumstance where the Department of Education or the school investigates where that custodial address, whether it's a legitimate custodial address?
I personally haven't seen that, although I know that some colleges will ask for verification forms to be filled out, and perhaps over the course of a 4-year education they might do an audit of the family. So the potential is there to be questioned about it. And I think it really is up to the family to be as truthful as possible.
Sure, for sure. So in general, though, it makes sense, if possible, for the lower earner to be the custodial parent to maximize financial aid. Is that right?
Ideally, if the student is looking at colleges that only take the FAFSA form.
Okay, so that brings into the question of the other form.
That's
the other
right.
process. Does a FAFSA require a copy of the judgment, a divorce judgment, be supplied?
No, the form itself does not. A college may ask that question. I guess one caveat is that if the custodial parent is remarried, the new spouse needs to be reported on the FAFSA, even though they're not the biological parent.
You mean the new spouse's income?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So that can be a surprise for many families
Yes,
who
I
didn't
imagine.
realize that was going to occur.
Right. So is there language that you recommend in the separation agreements for divorce that would be helpful to the parents in maximizing financial aid?
It's for the FAFSA, it really doesn't matter so much. It's more a planning opportunity, though, for families who happen to have a divorce prior to the student becoming a sophomore in high school. There are opportunities to talk to them about what the best financial outcome is going to be for the college years.
Okay. All right. What's the other form called?
So there are many different nicknames for it, but the profile is the most common. It's the CSS profile. It's College Scholarship Service profile form that is run by the College Board, which is the same entity that many students know as the SAT, AP, subject test website where they can gather
Okay.
a lot of material there.
So the same entity that does the testing reviews this profile form?
Yes.
All right.
And then submits that form or that data to the 229 colleges that use the form.
So not every college uses this profile form?
That's correct.
So what's the benefit to those colleges to using that profile form, if
Well,
any?
the profile is more intrusive, I guess is a good word,
Mhm.
into a family's financial situation. The colleges that use the profile want to get a broader, deeper, and broader picture of a family's financial situation. And by deeper, I mean they want to perhaps ask what the home equity is, which the FAFSA does not.
I see.
They might want to know if
Well, when you say home equity, you mean the equity in the marital home or in the home,
in the home.
not with the home equity loan balances or anything like that?
No, so
Okay.
the amount of equity that a parent theoretically could borrow against
Yes.
is what
That's
the
the point.
profile schools are
Mhm.
looking at. The profile form also asks for custodial and non-custodial parent information. So the colleges that use the profile form are going to gather the financials from both biological parents anyway.
And how about the new spouse? Does the profile require the income from the new spouse as well?
Yes, it does.
So potentially potentially four
Potentially
pockets.
4 incomes. They would love to see that.
Mhm,
And that's definitely something I've run into with families that I work with, where there might now be 4 incomes being considered for financial aid purposes.
Oh, interesting. So on the profile, what else is asked that might impact eligibility for financial aid?
Oh,
So
some
the equity in the
very-
home,
equity in the
potentially 4
home,
incomes.
Equity in a business, if a family has a small business. The FAFSA does not count the assets and liabilities of a family-owned business where there's less than 100 employees, whereas the profile does. So the profile will go after that information. The profile may also create a minimum contribution from a student for their college education. Even if the student is not working and making money, those colleges that use the profile are going to expect a minimal contribution from that student, so that they will build that into the financial aid formula.
Is the contribution from the student a percentage of the tuition? How is that determined?
It is typically a dollar amount, roughly between $1,800 and $2,000 a year is the minimum. Some colleges may have a threshold of $3,000 or $4,000. I've even seen some say on their websites, we expect the student to contribute $6,000 a year for their own education. Go figure out how to do it.
Interesting.
So it can depend on the school.
Uh-huh. And this is for, we've been talking about financial aid generally, but there are student loans and there are parent loans, right?
Mm-hmm.
So do we want to go back to the FAFSA and talk about both student and parent
Sure.
loans? All right.
Sure. So the FAFSA form is a form that should be filled out by every family, whether they think they're eligible for money or not. Few reasons behind that. Here in Massachusetts, for example, students who attend public high schools and gain advanced MCAS scores may be eligible for the John and Abigail Adams Scholarship, which is free tuition at the state universities in Massachusetts. The way to obtain the free tuition is to fill out the FAFSA form.
I see.
So even if you're an affluent family and you don't think you're eligible for money, well, you could be throwing away free tuition if you don't fill out the form.
Because people leave money on the table
That's
if they
right.
don't submit the FAFSA.
They leave money on the table, and that's not a good thing to do.
Okay.
The FAFSA is definitely required, though, for a student to be authorized to take on a student loan, a federal student loan. So the federal student loan program, the direct Stafford loan is typically what it's called. The student needs to fill out the FAFSA. You know, theoretically, it's the parent filling out the FAFSA for the student, but the FAFSA form is what then allows the student to take out the federal loans of $5,500 as a freshman, $6,500 as a sophomore, $7,500 as a junior and a senior. Some of that may be subsidized, some of it may not. That just means that we, the taxpayers, pay the interest while the student is in school if it's subsidized. But if it's unsubsidized, then the student is responsible for the interest.
After they graduate.
Actually, from day one.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, for the unsubsidized loans.
All right. So does the FAFSA have to be submitted every year for students?
Yes, it does. Yes, the FAFSA is what determines aid eligibility on an academic year. So it has to be renewed every year.
I see. So some parents may be enthusiastic about submitting the FAFSA for freshman year, maybe sophomore year, and lose interest in junior and senior year, but they're leaving that $7,500 a year on the table.
That's right.
That they're not accessing.
Yeah, and frankly, that's pretty decent money because the student can gain access to that federal loan with no cosigner, minimal interest. It's currently at 3.76%, and that's a fixed interest rate for the 10-year life of that particular note.
Yeah.
And the student has repayment options that start 6 months after graduation.
I see. For 10 years.
Yeah. Now, where else can an 18-year-old go get a $5,000 loan without any security?
Right. Well, 5,000 plus, well, 5,500 plus 5,500 plus.
That's right.
Well,
it adds up,
6,500, right?
It adds up to roughly $27,000 over a
Yeah.
4-year college career.
Yeah. It's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so that's the student loan portion of the FAFSA. And what about the parent loan portion of the FAFSA?
So if parents wish to take on loans to pay for college or pay for the difference that they can't afford from cash flow or assets that they've put aside for college, they may easily jump into what's called the parent loan for undergraduate students, the PLUS loan. The interest rate's a bit higher on that. It's over 7%. But it does have built-in death and disability insurance. It has the ability for some families up to a certain income to actually deduct some of the interest, much like a mortgage interest payment. So there are some benefits to it. It's a credit-based loan, so if you have good credit, you'll probably get the loan. But it's something that the FAFSA needs to be filed in order for the parent to be eligible for that loan. Now, the caveat there is if you have a non-custodial parent who wants to take a PLUS loan, they're not required to file the FAFSA, but they can simply contact the financial aid office at the school their student is attending and get authorization to take a PLUS loan in their name as well.
All right, so this is particular to divorced families. So the non-custodial parent files the FAFSA form and is eligible, or makes the student eligible with any luck for some student financial aid, plus potentially parent plus loans to the custodial parent.
Custodial parent, correct.
And then the non-custodial parent who has not submitted the FAFSA form can still go directly to the financial aid office of the institution and take out a parent plus loan themselves.
Yes.
All right. Well, that's interesting too. So we were talking before, I'm kind of circling back to the FAFSA. What information does the FAFSA not ask that the profile does ask? We were talking before about a home equity in the marital home, or equity in any real estate.
Yeah, well, so let's clarify that. So the FAFSA will not ask the custodial parent for any information on their primary residence.
Okay. And how about bank account balances?
They want to know what your cash, savings, and checking balances are as of the day you fill out the form. So theoretically, you want to fill out the form at the end of the month when your balances are lower.
After you paid some bills.
That's right.
And what about retirement assets on the
Well,
FAFSA?
it's interesting you bring that up because retirement assets are unfortunately put on the form too often by families, and that is not correct. You don't need to put retirement assets. Qualified retirement funds are not to be put on any of the financial aid forms.
Neither financial aid form?
Correct.
Wow, they're exempt then.
They're exempt from the calculations.
All right.
Now the CSS profile, let me just say this, some of those schools may ask for the balance of your retirement, but they're not going to use it in the formula. And I like to think they're trying to be altruistic and helping families separate retirement funds from non-retirement funds when they ask that question, and really forcing a parent to realize, oh, I don't need to put my 401k balance in this particular answer.
Yes, I see.
Which I think is a very good thing, because too many families do put their retirement monies in the answer box for the question, what do you have for investments?
Mm-hmm.
And that just blows up the whole financial aid opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And they wonder why they didn't get any financial aid.
I see.
And it's
'Cause they
because you
reported
filled the
too
form
much.
out wrong.
Right. Right. And so, the profile form, I guess let's talk about that for student aid and parent aid. Can you tell me about what the process is there?
So the profile form is going to have the custodial parent fill it out. And there is a section on there that asks for the non-custodial parent's name, address, email, phone number, etc. And for the colleges that require the non-custodial profile, a code will be generated when the student or the parent, the custodial parent, registers for the profile. Then the non-custodial parent should receive information on how to get started on their form. Now, the benefit of a divorced family is that the custodial parent will never see the numbers that the non-custodial parent puts in and vice versa. So there's still that level of privacy built in there, which is a good thing.
Okay, so let me just review for a moment. So the FAFSA, only one parent needs to submit the form, that's the custodial parent.
Correct.
And for the profile form, both parents have to submit separately.
Yes.
Both parents, divorced parents, have to submit separately, but neither one gets to see the information on
That's
the other's
correct.
form. All right. All right, so for the profile form, again, what's the likely outcome of student aid?
It can theoretically be pretty good because the profile form does provide more allowances to a family against income, assets, number in the household. They allow for an emergency cash fund, so they're not going to assess a percentage of what a family has in cash.
Mm-hmm.
It might be higher than the FAFSA's
Mm-hmm.
Allowance, which is a very nice thing. So in years past, prior to the 07-08 financial crisis in the country, it was often common to see the FAFSA have a lower EFC, a lower expected family contribution than the profile because home equity was not included in the FAFSA number. But since the market changed, there might be occasions where the profile EFC is equal or lower than the FAFSA.
So theoretically, could parents take out Parent Plus loans through the FAFSA process and through the profile process?
Well, the registration for the loans for the student and the parent loans is only through the FAFSA. The profile is used by colleges that want to get a bigger picture of the family's financial strength, and they typically use that data from that form to determine how much of their institutional free money they are going to give to that student.
So the profile really only gives awards for free money, not loans.
Typically, yes.
I see, that's an important distinction between the processes.
I would say the only caveat there might be if a particular college has their own internal loan system that they might tie to the profile numbers. It's rare, but
I see. So the loans come through the FAFSA process.
correct.
Parent and student loans through the FAFSA process, and what we're calling free money comes through the profile process from the institution.
In general.
In general. Like everything, there are exceptions.
There are always caveats.
Or as I say to my children now, there are more exceptions than rules now.
Yes.
There used to be more rules and occasional exceptions. All right, so do you have any suggested tactics or strategies for parents, particularly divorced parents, how to maximize college aid?
Well, if a family wants to take advantage of finding the best financial aid package available to them and their student or students, depends how many they have to educate, it's probably a really good idea to run their numbers when their student is still a sophomore in high school, no later than junior year in high school.
The oldest child, I imagine,
Correct.
right? Yeah.
Yes. And if you haven't done so yet and you already have one in college, get on it now.
Uh-huh.
But run your numbers to determine your eligibility for aid with one parent reporting financials through the FAFSA or both parents reporting through the profile. And there are calculators out there that allow you to do that. And frankly, I offer complimentary reviews of EFCs when people come to my website and submit their financial data.
Oh, it's on your website? It's some form calculation of
Yes.
EFC stands for?
Expected family contribution.
Thank you.
And most people would call that a deductible. That's your minimum threshold you're probably
You're out of
going
pocket.
to pay. Right.
So the EFC calculation you recommend in the sophomore year of the student's high school
Yes.
first to determine what the parent is going to be expected to pay.
Yes. So once a family has determined their aid eligibility, they might find some wildly different numbers. For example, a custodial parent that files only the FAFSA form may have an EFC of $15,000 a year, but then when they run the numbers combining both incomes on the profile, perhaps it comes back at $25,000 a year as a combined EFC.
Yeah.
And you look at that and say, well, that's a difference of $10,000 a year. That's $40,000 over 4 years.
Yeah.
Maybe our students should not be considering colleges that use the non-custodial information.
Meaning the colleges that take the profile form.
Right.
So you eliminate the colleges that require the profile form.
That's right. That's a
really
key
narrows
tactic.
down. Yeah.
Now, many families don't want to hear that because that might eliminate a so-called dream school or a college that the student has always had their eyes on.
Or the parent has had
Or
their
the
eyes
parent
on.
has had their eyes
Yeah.
on. You know, again, we're going back to the unfulfilled parental
Yeah.
dreams. Who's going to college here, the parent or the student? The student. We have to remember that, and it's not easy to remember that when there's so much emotion involved in the process.
Right. So that's one strategy you
Yes.
mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah. So that particular strategy could open up opportunities for more financial aid funding simply by eliminating the non-custodial, theoretically, income that might be much higher than the custodial parent.
In the formula.
Mhm.
Eliminate the person from the formula.
That's right. And it's all legal and above the board.
Yeah.
And it's about looking at colleges that only require that information. So that's an arduous task because the student and the parents need to work on finding a great list of schools that are going to be academically, socially, and financially appropriate. And I think that's really how a college search should be done.
Yeah.
To kind of fix what we used to always hear people say is, go get into the best college you can, and then we'll figure out how to pay for it later. That's just impossible today. You know, unless you can simply write a check for $250,000, which is what some of the most expensive schools are going to cost over 4 years, then you really should not be looking at schools that way.
Yeah.
You need to help your student understand what the parameters are. Are there any gates we need to put up here to keep the student on track?
I see. Have you been in situations where you're sitting with a student and the student's parents who have been divorced?
I have.
Yeah, how's that?
Sometimes it works well, sometimes not so well. I think the biggest reminder that I'm always trying to say is to the parents, this isn't about you, this is about the student. Make sure that you guys are working together in this case to help the student find the right outcome. And let's try to take the guilt out of this. Let's try to take the emotion out as best we can, because college has become so expensive and the return on investment is not as clear as it perhaps once was. It's important for the student to be looking at great schools where they're going to have opportunities to be exceptional and do it at the right price. And that's really important to have that as part of the conversation up front.
That's a good message. All too often we see so much conflict about where to send a child to college. And of course, I rarely hear about what the child wants because I'm dealing with the parents, but to me, looking at their finances, as I am privileged to do in the course of a divorce, I see that sometimes they're completely unrealistic about what they're willing to pay for college and how to go about getting financial aid.
Mm-hmm.
We've given us some great ideas and tactics and strategies for maximizing financial aid, and giving us a peek behind the curtain on the process, the two processes with the two forms. I appreciate your joining me here today on Inside Divorce. This has been Todd Weaver from Strategies for College, and I hope you listen to this and other podcasts that are on the website of Grossman & Associates, Ltd. This is Hindell Grossman. If you'd like more information about the topics covered in our podcast, please contact us at Grossman & Associates. You'll find a competent and experienced team of compassionate, responsive, and innovative legal professionals. Email me at hindell@grossmanltd.com. My first name is spelled Hindell, or call us at 617-969-0069. Thank you for listening.